Hey all, there's been a lot of negativity surrounding Warcraft Rumble lately, and I thought I'd make this video, particularly on the back of Excoundrel's video talking about what went wrong with Warcraft Rumble. Highly recommend you check that out. I'll leave a link down in the description below. But Warcraft Rumble, I believe, is on a doom path. And the crazy thing is, it's not going to take a lot to fix it. So I feel like there's just been this negativity mounting towards the game, and a lot of people see the greatness that can come from it, but it's just not being realized. And I think this all boils down to one central problem. And that problem is that the game lacks hype. I mean, think about it. I really challenge you here. Think about the last things that have been released. And after the thing was released and you started interacting with it, what kind of hype did you feel towards it? Were you excited to play it? Are you still excited to play it? Are you like enthusiastic about continuing to mess around with this thing? And I would say that it is somewhat natural to lose some of that enthusiasm, but I feel like a lot of the new releases have just been missing that extra oomph that makes them, that really compels you to want to spend time with it and find all the nuances with it. So I think there's a lot to be said about releases and having them come out in a strong state. And what strong releases do is they challenge how you see the game. They make you look at the game in a new light. How can I integrate this in my deck? How can I make it mine, And it gives you new things to fantasize about, new things that make you want to play the game. And if we look at things that have come out recently, it feels like a lot of them have been kind of lackluster. And it's not for a lack of aesthetic. It's not for a lack of design. It's for a lack of challenge. It's for a lack of stats, So when we look at this in terms of the recent minis that have been released, they've been played very safe. They come out in a very balanced state. It seems like they're following a stat template. The gold costs that they have versus the stats they have, it seems quote unquote fair. But the problem is a lot of these units have role overlap with existing units, so it's hard to feel compelled to invest in the unit in the first place. And then some of the talents they have are just complete throwaways. So even if their stats might be balanced, the talents that elevate them to the next level and make you want to play them, they're not worth taking. So just look at these units. This is kind of how I've rated them, but the units that I feel have had a strong impact on the game: Witch Doctor with its shield, Chimera with its poison and its flying ability. It fulfills a niche that no other unit really does. Emperor Thaurissan, he's just a very strong unit, particularly in PvP, because he can elevate units' levels. And then Ancient of War, he fundamentally warped the PvP meta by adding Lightning Rod and changing how unbounds and spells work, particularly in the Gold Rush metas. Now, the units that kind of release in an okay state here, we have Cenarius, we have Fairy Dragon, we have Dryad, she's like decent. We have Bog Beast, decent stats. They fulfill like a pivotal role sometimes, particularly Fairy Dragon, but they're not like hyper compelling. There's not like you need this unit for your deck to function. You don't necessarily need any of these units to make something happen. They're just like, they work. And then in between here, we have Sylvanas. She was like the first season 1 unit release. She was like okay, but never really great. And a lot of that is just borne out in her cost. She costs so much. Really, you're just taking her for her passive these days in PvP, it seems like. And then the units that are weak, we have Anu. It just seems like you're paying a lot of gold to be behind, and then he dies for free. He's not really like a strong unit in combat. So basically he's balanced around this notion that he might cheese out a game and win and be like kind of toxic. We have Moonkin, who has like no stats. We'll get into that in a bit. And then we have Earth and Moon, which nobody even talks about anymore because it's just a scuffed blizzard. So because of this, like most of these units have released in like kind of a underwhelming state. And I mean, think about it. Like when you call something mid in a game, that means it's whatever. Like whatever, man. I don't really care about that. It's mid. Like not very inspiring. So because things are releasing in kind of a mid state on average, I'd say that it's hard to get excited about them. It's hard to feel inspired to use them in your decks. And a lot of them just seem to be released haphazardly. Like they don't have a defined purpose. Like, why am I actually playing this unit? And we'll talk about that with Dryad in a bit. Some of the units actually just feel weak, comparable to their peers. Moonkin is like a prime example of that. And then there's just a high barrier to even wanting to adopt the unit in the first place because you have to spend your limited resources to upgrade it. So unless you're just wailing out on the game, like you're not going to want to invest in these units if they appear weak at the beginning. So it's all these things together is going to make it very difficult to be excited for them. So prime example here, I know this is a little bit of an unfair comparison because Thanos is a leader, so he's going to have an extra little ability going for him. But when we compare Moonkin to Thanos, they basically are in the same gold cost stat ratio area. Thanos has a little bit extra range. All of his attacks are area, and his breakpoints are a lot more favorable. So his first attack will wipe out Harpies, whereas Moonkin's will not. And if you look at like the attack speed, he has a faster attack speed, so he's more consistent on that front, whereas Hurricane's occurring every 2 seconds it appears based off this DPS. And Thanos is considered a weak leader. Like he's only good in very specific metas and very specific circumstances. And he has this extra thing that boosts his level and makes him even more powerful. So when he comes online, when he gets to high level, that's when Thanos is strong. Moonkin doesn't have anything like that going for him. What happened with Moonkin was he was a terrible unit, and then he got armor, and he became a terrible unit with armor. So why am I running this unit? It's very underwhelming. So what am I bringing this Moon Chicken for? He doesn't outrange anything else. His AoE's worse than units in a lower cost bracket like Pyromancer. His talents don't bring anything to the table. Like what do I need +2 spell levels for? It's not changing any breakpoints fundamentally, except like maybe Chain Lightning on 2 units. He's not flexible. I mean, you have to spend 4 gold to get him out there. He's not good in 1-to-1 combat. Like, what do you actually want to bring this new deck without purpose? That's what we were talking about before. No defined purpose. So Moonkin solutions, there are a lot of different things that can be done. None of these is necessarily the right one, but there are different things you could do to increase its flair and make it more interesting. You could give him more range, so he's more of a siege from the back lines. You could give him Hurricane casting more often, like every second instead of every 2 seconds, to increase his DPS, make him a more formidable combat unit. You could add functionality by changing his talents, maybe make like the next spell you cast be 2 less if it's your next mini played. You could lower his cost, so he's 3 gold, so he's a more consistent unit. And at 400 health, that would make him in a sweet spot. He's over 400 health, he survives Deep Breath. These are all different things you can do. Next we have Dryad. So Dryad is in the okay tier, and the reason I rate her okay is basically she's just a more expensive troll who has poison baseline and root. But the thing is, all of her talents are like really underwhelming. Barrage is actually actively detrimental. It can actually get her killed. Nature's Swiftness doesn't really bring a lot to the table. You'd think it would be like super exciting. I was really excited when I heard this announced, but it doesn't actually synergize with the units you think it should. And then Thorns is just like, you never want her to be attacked anyway. So this is like this niche pick that you're never going to pick. So basically you're paying an extra gold for a troll that has 1 less range, is fast, which is a liability because she will actually run forward into the enemy and get killed next to their tower. And she attacks slower, so her poison's applied less often. So like if you want poison on troll, just take troll and take the poison talent, right? So all these things together, just having an extra 150 health, it doesn't make her a compelling choice. So how do we fix this? Well, I think you really want to just lean into what makes her exciting. Let her freak flag fly high, right? She's got a great aesthetic. But the problem is there are too many limitations on her. The first limitation is Nature's Swiftness can't be played on Hogger, Gargoyle. These are units you would think that like the most exciting to play with because Wing Buffet with Gargoyle, you can't play Nature's Swiftness with that because it won't allow it to be buffed. So this would be like a really zoom unit. It would be pretty fun to see, and it would create a cheese. And cheese is good because it makes people think about how they're going to play the game differently. Whether it's I'm going to respond to this in a different way, or I want to incorporate this into my own play style. Similarly with Hogger is a fast boy, and seeing him go zoom is pretty cool. But unfortunately, you can't even do it. You just can't buff him because of his passive. It just, for whatever reason, he's just been limited from doing that. So one thing that could be done is you could remove the limits on Nature's Swiftness. Now, if that is seen as too toxic, then maybe add Nullify to the Nature's Swiftness buff. Like that would be a simple change to this talent. You like, not only does it give 2.5 additional speed, it also gives Nullify. Then units like Grom, like mid-range bruisers, Stonehoof Tauren, things like that would be immune to burn, poison, stuns, snares. And this would make them a lot more agile and able to engage in units and not be stopped, you know, so you'd have like a more compelling threat. Another change that could be done is just reworking Thorns. So this would be a safer change overall. You could rework Thorns to abolish magic. And basically what that would do is you would allow it to apply Nullify to a single friendly target. Again, we already talked about Nullify. Prevents poisons, burns, snares, stuns. You could just do this. This would be like a safer version without the 2.5 speed. And then you could allow Nature Swiftness to be applied to Hogger and Gargoyle. I think Nature Swiftness plus Nullify on Hogger and Gargoyle would be toxic with these traits because it would be very difficult to stop them. But Nature Swiftness alone without Nullify on Hogger and Gargoyle would be interesting. It would be like an interesting cheese. So like there are different options you could do here with these talents to make them more compelling. And then finally in PvP, this is just a consideration for PvP. She doesn't live through Deep Breath. She doesn't live through Blizzard. And this makes her very difficult to run at 4 cost. So one solution to this, I mean, we compare her to Huntress. Huntress has 800 effective health, which allows her to live through Deep Breath and Blizzard unless there's like a polymorph or something else supporting it. Dryad only has 370 effective health. So what could be done is you could just lower her health to 280 so she's not like this tanky unit at 4 gold, and then give her resistance so that she lives through both Blizzard and Deep Breath. And that would make her a lot more compelling as a choice. But she might be broken. Yes, that's what you want. I know it's hard to believe. And believe me, I am biased against Dryad because I like Grom. I don't want him to get rooted in place. You know, I don't want my bruisers to get rooted in place. But it's good if the new units are interesting. It is good if they change the way people approach the game. If they turn out to be too strong, revisit it at a later time and tone it down. You know, like the problem is these units are not releasing in a compelling state. So next we have Ancient of War. Lightning Rod is really well designed. I hate it. Thank you. But it is really well designed. Like it is fundamentally alter the way the game is played. It doesn't appear all the time, but it does open up a new niche for like Death Bolt type comps, which I think is good. The problem is this unit, outside of Lightning Rod, is very uncompelling. So one thing that could be done is maybe baking some movement speed into some of these other talents, like maybe he moves faster with the Sapling talent, or maybe moves faster with the Behemoth talent. Maybe make these like more accessible. Like Siege is not really that good of a talent. I just don't see what upside it offers. But another thing that could be done is just making him like medium fast speed baseline. And this would add a little bit more counterplay during like the Gold Rush meta, and also make these other talents just better on their own. So like there are a lot of things that can be done here. I just feel like the unit is like really good with Lightning Rod, and then otherwise he's just kind of a mid right off. And you would think he would be good because like at 1 gold cost, he is very stat efficient. At 10 gold cost, he is very stat inefficient. And I like that he's stat effective at lower costs, because basically that kind of puts you in a spot where you're trying to keep your gold low so you can play him at a low cost because of his surge effect. But the problem is the juice isn't worth the squeeze here, so you're never going to want to play him at a 1 cost. Next, let's talk about dungeons and the new content. So dungeons, Skullomance just came out, and it is actually decent for new players of the game because you can jump right in at level 5. It's immediately relevant. There are 3 problems with it. First of all, there's no real replayability with dungeons in their current incarnation. Once you solve it, you know roughly what units you want to take to the dungeon, and it's very easy to overcome the mechanics as a result. A lot of these will just be dead on arrival for long-term players because there's no level cap to the dungeon, so you just go in with like over-leveled units and you just delete the dungeon in 1 second. Deleted. And then finally, Skullomance in particular was just slightly undercooked in some regards. Particularly Jandis, I just feel like not enough was done with her, and we'll talk about that now. So if you read her descriptions here, if left unchecked, her tome or her illusions will turn into temperamental tomes. This heavily implies, the wording on it, that her illusions should be dealt with in some fashion. But that's not how the fight works at all. It's actually harder to kill her illusions than it is to just kill the books. The books die in 1 hit. They hit pretty hard, but they die in 1 hit. And this makes this mechanic very trivial. Like you're just hoping it doesn't interfere with whatever your plan is, which is usually just push one side really hard, maybe take the middle tower to kind of divert her illusion away and take health away from the books as they spawn. So this is actually very easy to fix. Just double the HP of the books, give the books armor so the towers don't just kill the books easily, and then maybe increase their damage a little bit more, just to make them that much more threatening and make you have to think about, okay, how am I going to deal with these books? And then drop the illusion health by like 50, 60%, just so it is possible to kill them with like an unbound unit. That way there is actually an incentive to deal with the illusions instead of just letting them run amok and then letting the books die. Very easy to fix, and otherwise this fight's pretty good. Next, this one's really convoluted. Again, juice might not be worth the squeeze here, but I really feel like the graves just spawn haphazardly. I've had attempts where like 50 graves spawn under my units, and then I end up having to start over from scratch, and I've had attempts where no graves spawn here, and I feel like it could be done in a better way. I don't know, I'll just explain it very briefly, but in my eyes, like the grave should go up and down, like one side should be safe and the other shouldn't. You should send them through, grab the meeting stone, and then like if you fight at the grave, maybe it's an auto loss of the push, but it's okay because you made some progress in the meeting stone, and then you can make a decision here at the arrows, and how it should just be one decision. Like you have like some graves here that are up, and then you have some graves down here that are down, and you turn the arrow and you time it just right, and you go through and you fight the boss. I think that would be the most interesting. You could spin the boss different ways by doing this, and that would be a really cool design. Maybe it's a little bit convoluted design, unfortunately, so I only bring it up because I feel like it's a missed opportunity. So let's talk about heroic dungeons. What would be cool to make the dungeons more replayable is if you had a heroic difficulty one time per week. Basically, it would consume one of your heroes' clears for the week. It would count for their clears. So like, let's say it's Black Rock week, I'm doing Skullomance, and I have these 4 heroes. Let's say I do heroic mode, Dracasath. Now, all I have left is Rend, Ragnaros, and ET left to do, because Dracasath's done. And then you get the rewards for both heroic and regular. So, it's probably going to be buggy, I know. But anyway, how it will work is you cap the player's level at 25. So, it's kind of attainable. There's some incentivization to kind of push for level 25 on your own personal units, and the enemy levels are capped at 27. That way, it is difficult. Like this is orange. It should be red because like they're above you by 2 levels, and there are 2 components to making this content fun or engaging, I should say. First, it should be challenging, and second, it should be fun. Now, fun is subjective, and fun is going to require that novel things are occurring. So we're going to talk about that now. And what is this? Evergreen design. So evergreen design, I'm sure anyone who works in the space understands what this is, but basically it's when something is repeatable and it is infinitely repeatable. And the better evergreen design will challenge how you think about things for a longer period of time. So they'll give you more novel things to think about over a longer period of time, so it doesn't become boring. It doesn't become rote. It doesn't become like repetitive and just, I don't want to do this. This is a chore. This is homework. The goal is to make things sustainable for long periods of time. So what can be done? Well, the most basic level thing, in my opinion, is to give everyone the same random relics and don't rotate them for that week. And what you would do with this is, I would do this specifically on heroic mode only, is basically this makes this like a challenge for the content where people are like actively engaging the community. Like, how did you overcome this? How did you overcome this dungeon? And what did you do? What relics did you pick? Like, what was your team loadout? And like, this is like the most barest thing you could do to try and facilitate that. Now, ideally, you'd have some weeks that are like easy with like life. Well, hopefully not like always life leech or whatever, but you know, some weeks that are easier with like, you know, like arcane jewel or whatever, or the standard, and then you have like some more difficult weeks where you have to make hard choices, like maybe Troll's Blood Potion is a decent one on one, and that ends up being like the best pick of the 3. And what this does is it creates a locus for content creation, and content creation is good because it gives your content creators something to do, and it increases awareness of the game because like people are like thinking critically about how they're going to play the game. The next thing you could do, and this would be the step up and it'd be a lot harder to implement maybe, but it would make it a lot more interesting, is you add rotating modifiers to the dungeons. So like think like the Dark Moon Fair weeks, like where there's just random modifiers on the quests sometimes, like Swole Trolls is the one I think of with the trolls coming out. Like, what if that was like what was going on in the dungeon? Just make it crazy, you know, like step up, win a prize. Dark Moon prize wheel is applied to enemy minis and your minis by default. So you're going to be incentivized to play 5-6 cost minis and like try and minimize the ones in between. And your opponent will also be incentivized to do the same, but of course they can't change their deck. It's just like the same restriction that you have is applied to the opponent. So there's, you know, a little bit of fairness going on there. The next is like this one. I don't know how easy it would be to implement, but I think it would be cool. Is like, what if the dungeons had like a lava modifier where basically you have to use flying units for parts of it to try and overcome the mechanics. I think this would be hard to implement, but it'd be very cool if you could like have a reason to run like only flying minis in certain dungeons. It would also be difficult in some, like No Murgon, for example, because the third one requires you to clear those light bulbs. The third is the sky is falling. Your air units take burn damage over time. Basically, this is like a reverse. And it's like, okay, well, I can't run air units except Fairy Dragon because she has the nullified trait, which makes her immune to burn. But there's like another little restriction on like, okay, how do I modify my deck? And then fourth is the fair is in town. Dark Moon Fair Chest, replace gold mines. Like there are so many different things. And these, like, I feel like these are like just scratching the surface. These are probably not great examples. Like what you're going to want to do, like the system is already in place, right? In World of Warcraft, like look at the affixes for mythic dungeons. Like what if like all the bosses were like the second boss in Dire Maul, where like you spawn a unit and the Void Eyes just spawn. Like that's an affix you could do, right? Like you want things that fundamentally change the encounter and also make it interesting. Like make it a new mechanic, not like a restriction. Like some of these are restrictions, right? Like the Dark Moon Fair prize wheel, that's a restriction. People don't like restrictions placed on them in general. It's okay to have it every once in a while, but I think doing it like most of the time is probably a mistake. Your air units take burn damage, that's a restriction, right? Like that is, it's punishing to run the air units. So like I would say in general, try to avoid the ones that are punishing and try and like actually pursue ones that increase how you would approach it by like making you think critically about what you include, or maybe even incentivizing like certain types of play, like the Dark Moon Fair chests. You want to go after those chests with unbounds. So next we have aspirational content. This is stuff that's in the end game. Baron Geddon is a prime example. It's the hardest boss in the game right now. And then Onyxia is another example. And these are things that you are planning your account progress to clear. Basically, what am I going to level up? What am I putting all my resource into? This is the penultimate challenge for me to clear in the game. And we need more content like this on the PvE side, because ultimately there's only two things that are like really challenging right now. Maybe three if you include like Ragnaros. But I mean, I haven't really struggled with Ragnaros that much. It's mostly just been Baron Geddon. I didn't even really struggle with Onyxia, to be honest. On the flip side of this, I know this is going to sound conflicting because it is, but there's been a lot of negative sentiment surrounding the recent buffs to Baron Geddon. And I think that's partly because he represents a roadblock in the middle of the raid. And it's very difficult. The way the encounter is designed, it's very difficult to just overcome it with levels. There are ways to cheese it, but like you barely do it. And the reason for this is you're on a clock, and it's very difficult to just zerg the boss down because he nukes your wave. He spawns a bunch of ads, so you have to deal with it. So like it is a very compelling fight in my opinion. I think it's one of the best designed encounters in the game, which is a 180 from my initial stance. But I think it is very well designed. The problem is, because it is a roadblock in the middle of the raid and it stops people from progressing and it used to be easy, it creates this negative sentiment. I know I was talking with my raid partner and we were actually actively discussing quitting the game because of just how frustrating it was. You know, like I think a lot of players are just like looking for a W, you know, and having like the most difficult challenge in the middle is like, it leads to something just a negative. It's a negative progress thing that's frustrating, and it can, set you back where it's like, well, I was doing this fine before, like what do I do now? And I actually want to point out something. The fight changed again. Nobody's talking about this, but the fight changed again since last month. So they buffed it last month and made it a lot harder by adding the phases and deleting your units. But look here, when we watch this clip, when he phases the first time at 5:08, the ads come out. It used to be if you phase him again within 2 minutes, he would not spawn ads. But look at this. Within 1 minute and 16 seconds, he spawned more ads. Yeah, it got stealth buffed again. So you can't even like set up this window. However, if you phase him within 1 minute, he will not spawn the ads. So like, again, the bar just keeps getting raised and raised and raised, and I think this creates like a level of frustration that I think ultimately is damaging for the game, because it turns people away. It's like, well, I was clearing this fine before, my strategy's not working anymore. What do I do? Right? So I think it's very important that the most difficult stuff is more towards the end, or is consistent throughout. Like doing like a quick buff to make it harder in the middle of its life cycle is probably not the way. Even though I appreciate the changes that were made to Baron-Geddon, and I think that they were very insightful. So what can be done for raids? Well, what would be interesting to make raids more evergreen is to raise the level of the existing raid bosses to 30 to 33, maybe even just 32, like have a 2-level advantage on them. And this would kind of incentivize some players to push for that whale status to overcome it, as kind of like an achievement thing, give them a little bit of incentive to spend. And you could add vanity skins to the end as an incentive, like, here's my, I've done it, here's what I can show for it, right? That would be really cool, I think. And if you really want to go above and beyond, maybe on some of the like less inspiring fights, throw in an extra mechanic, right? Like make them a little bit more interesting, something you have to overcome. So for PvP, there are a lot of problems with PvP. I think that personally, my stance is the game should take a massive risk here, and it should just equalize the levels in PvP and like really reboot PvP, like try and use it as a springboard to get players to play the game. Something accessible, something that people are like, wow, this is the only game that's really doing this. It's offering a free-to-play experience where I can jump right in and I am competitive with my peers after a little bit of time getting talents, like I think that would speak volumes for like maybe getting interest revived in the game. But it would take some effort, and it would take a lot of, like making PvP more of a central attraction for the game instead of just having it off to the side. It's mentioned one time, and it's like a little side menu with like no real motivation to do it. Because right now the problem is it's just unapproachable by new players. You get in after 19 games, you realize that you're out leveled all the time. You don't have the talents even at the beginning. So if you don't have those talents, it feels very difficult to overcome challenges because you don't have that extra little oomph on each of your units to do things that are really cool in PvP. And if equalization of levels in PvP throughout is like just against management, like maybe just add some events. Like a game I play on the side, it's called Command & Conquer Rivals. They had events from day one, and what the events did is they made the level cap much lower, and you got a bunch of rewards for completing the events. The better you did in the event, like if it was 10 games, the more rewards you got. Like, why can't Rumble do this? Why can't you have like an arena draft mode? Why aren't there no events that like get people their foot in the door in PvP? Why is PvP completely uncelebrated in this game? It just doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense. Another problem that appears, and this is kind of a seasonal problem, like it comes and goes and it's dependent on the meta, is that right now there's this turtling meta going on, and it comes and goes, but like I think the least fun time to play the game is when games are going to overtime. And this picture shows you exactly what the problem is. Both players are at full health and they're in overtime with 20 seconds to go. And I wonder why that is. Well, there are 4 main culprits. There's Harvest Golem, who stuns units and prevents any push from approaching the core. Chicken also has this effect, but it's a little bit less polarizing. It's still bad, though. I would say both of these probably need to be adjusted. Easiest adjustment is to just make it so they don't spawn on the second Harvest Golem. I guess you would have to change the unit ID. I don't know exactly. I'm not a programmer. Deep Breath Blizzard. These give you a lot of value. Basically, they do like 6 different things. They increase your tempo, they protect pushes that you have going on, they remove gold miners, they do like chip damage to the base, and they can also remove or help change an attack into a favorable one. So all these things together, particularly with like Deep Breath, which extends across the map and gives you like the ability to neutralize pushes from 2 different angles, like there's got to be some sort of downside to these, right? Next, we have Shaman Totem. I think Shaman Totem with Harvest Golem and Rocket Towers is kind of toxic. Like its initial implementation seemed to be to counteract like spell spam on the base, which can't even be done right now because it's bugged. But the problem is that it actually trivializes all damage done to the base and sends games to overtime. And right now, it's making it so that these games are like going down to the last 10 seconds to determine whose Shaman Totem is ticking at a more favorable rate and who got the last couple spells in. And I think that's just kind of absurd because the big issue is it also trivializes small pushes. Like the whole point is for you to reach the opponent's base and tap them a few times and get a little bit of damage in. Like that is a preponderance of strategies that should work in the game, because death bowls are like limited to a select few heroes. We got Tyrion, we got Draxath, we got Cenarius, maybe Anu if you count him, and then spell cleave. Like that is what's going on the most. Is you got like Baron, Jaina. Basically, that's it. Like that's what I feel like a lot of people are playing. Like they're playing with spells to do damage. You got ET, Baron, Jaina, Charlga. These guys are like they're trying to hold the line with their Harvest Golem, and then they're doing a little bit of spell chip to win the game. And then maybe they've got Shaman in their deck to keep their base healthy. And then finally, you got like pushes that are like light pushes, like Grom and Rend and units like that are like trying to reach the enemy base, but they're not expecting it to reach it for a very long time. And these types of pushes are the ones that get punished the hardest by Shaman Totem working the way it does, because any like minute damage you get done, it gets undone, and then it also sends these games to long protracted states. Dragon Rocket Towers, another problem. It's primarily the Rocket Towers because they just do full damage to everything, and they hit so many units even at far range that Harvest Golem with stun can keep things off your base. So I think like either removing the Rocket Towers, Dragon Towers from the base, maybe like nerfing half of the effect of Harvest Golem so it doesn't trigger twice, maybe nerfing the Shaman Totem to only heal half. These would like all be positive changes to make the game a little bit less turtley and more dynamic and make things matter a little bit more in the mid game. Deep Breath. So big problem with DB is that it just clears like pretty much every unit in the game at 400 damage. The only units that are really escaping are really Moonkin, which is now 425. Sorry, I haven't updated that. Sylvanas, if she is at a level advantage, which is almost never the case. Nobody levels their Sylvanas to 11. Blood Mage Thanos, Flamewaker, and Frostwolf Shaman. Frostwolf Shaman is the most notable, and I mean it has a very strong meta presence. Aside from the fact that it lives against Deep Breath, simply the totem alone is good enough. So the problem is there are all these units in between that should live but don't. But the problem is most of them are never going to see play. Necromancer doesn't see play because Deep Breath kills it in one hit. Firehammer, 1 hit. Worgen, 1 hit. Drake, 1 hit. Meatwagon, 1 hit. Charlga, 1 hit. Lowering it below 340 is probably like the bare minimum just to get these other units in play. And then I would lean more towards 300 personally. I know that is extreme. It still kills Witch Doctor in 1 hit. It makes it a lot more level sensitive. However, the big problem is because it kills all these units, you just don't see a lot of these 3 and 4 cost minis in play because it puts way too much pressure across the map. And basically, there's a secondary consideration here. Jaina is going to be the least impacted from a nerf. And as you can see here, at 300 damage, Jaina will just barely not kill Necromancer. So it will take a lot to basically overcome the problem that DB is representing for the meta. You could also alternatively just lower the radius and the range of it to make it harder to aim. I think this is a lot. This doesn't really solve the problem though, because like good players will be good at timing and hitting it, but it will still be like incredibly oppressive because of its ability to just reach across the map, unless the range is like dramatically nerfed. And then finally, Blizzard is going to be the default pick if Deep Breath is like over nerfed, because Blizzard isn't that far behind. You use it to do a lot of chip damage to the base. So I think the solution is just make it as big as Arcane Blast. That way you have to make a decision about where you're going to aim it instead of, hitting the side of the base plus also hitting whatever unit that spawns and clearing it for free. I think that's just a big problem that comes with it. And you have to be a little bit more selective about where you aim it and where you get value with it. Let's talk about modifiers. Big problem with modifiers is they're not very inspiring. Many of them polarize strong playstyles that exist, and none of them really force you to change your deck outside of Gold Rush and Hero's Resolve. Like, those are the two that actually are like, you should change your deck dramatically to accommodate these. Gold Rush seems right now to favor more of like the Death Ball strategies, because you can afford to just spaff off a free Ancient of War, and the 4 gold isn't that big of a deal, and then you can also have your big boys rolling out slowly, getting bigger and bigger, and then pushing down the base. Whereas Hero's Resolve seems to incentivize playing like 2 or 3 heroes, particularly Hogger and Baron and Jaina, because these guys are already really strong, except with the exception of Hogger. So the big problem is they polarize the existing playstyles that are already doing really well in the meta. So the modifier should seek to kind of disrupt that a little bit and get people to change how they play how they're loading out their decks. So like here's a prime example in my opinion. Bounty Hunt. I think Bounty Hunt is one that seems like it would be good, but the problem is really all it does is it restricts you from playing whelp eggs, which are already not played. After they were nerfed, they just don't have a lot of utility outside of like Ren decks maybe, and First Strike modifier. And that's basically it. Maybe the chickens on the Harvest Golem. So what can be done about this is just reversing how it works. Instead of every 5 units you kill gives you 1 gold, what about every 5 units you lose gives you 1 gold? Now you wouldn't call it Bounty Hunt. Maybe you'd call it, reimbursement or something. I don't know. Whatever, But basically, there are a lot of just different modifiers that kind of fall flat in this regard. And I would say like the towers are like super impactful because the Rocket Tower, the Dragon Tower, they will lead to like turtling metas because they're so effective at just clearing pushes. They actually just cement existing playstyles like Emperor Thaurissan, Jaina, Baron. Whereas these guys down here, they don't really do much. They don't really have a high impact. Like Bounty Hunt doesn't really do anything. It just people stop playing eggs entirely. And besides, it shares a modifier with First Strike. First Strike is an okay modifier. I think this one's fine to stay in. Fortifications isn't even in the game anymore as far as I know. Gold Rush, this one's an okay modifier. Adrenaline Rush, I used to like this one, and then they nerfed it, and it has like no effect. I know this one was really unpopular because it made people feel like that they were punished for not pushing. However, I think it opened up certain playstyles of kind of waiting, and it was kind of like a chess match. Like you wanted to wait, but you also wanted to be efficient with your gold. So like you could create like these big pushes and try and punish your opponent that way. And with Ancient of War, I think it would be even more so in that direction. Of course, Ancient of War already is favored in Gold Rush, so maybe at this point the Adrenaline Rush should be switched to the opposite, and it's more like Blood in the Water or something, where the more damage you do to your opponent's base, the more income you get. So like games end a little bit faster. And then maybe like make it harder to play spells in that, or I don't know exactly what you would do. Collateral damage. This one is okay as well. I think it makes games faster. It doesn't really like fundamentally change how people play, but I do think that people will experiment with like sappers and stuff as a result of this. Hero's Resolve is fine. I think Thanos is a little polarizing in this one. only when Gold Rush is active at the same time, which kind of speaks to the design of Thanos. Stonebind is fine. Ward is fine. This Heavy Mortar one I've never seen before. It seems like it would be probably not the best, just because it would slow the game down even further. Because usually whoever takes a tower is in a winning position, and that gives them a little bit more room to push forward. But if the towers don't rebuild, it just means you have to push even further back from your base. So I don't know if I'm exactly enthusiastic about this one either, to be honest, even though I've never seen it. Oh, and I never showed these off, but like this video here, like it shows you exactly what the problem is in PvP earlier. Basically, I mean, you can see the game, like they're at full health. This is damage is done from Deep Breath alone. There's some poison damage done here. The Shaman Totem comes out. And then there's also a Shaman Totem coming out here. One Deep Breath comes out at the very last second, and that determines the game. Like that is the gameplay. That is the gameplay of the turtle meta right now. Again, it's happening here. You know, last 20 seconds. We got a Deep Breath coming out here. Bulava's cycles a little bit slower, but he does have Jaina plus Deep Breath, a little bit extra damage. He can't use his execute. He loses because he didn't have that one last Deep Breath. So ultimately, I feel like it is just not that compelling of gameplay, where it just comes out to the last second. Now, largely that's a reflection of the modifiers and the towers allowing that to occur, plus these 4 units being really strong. So beyond this, what can be done? You could buff some of these certain units that exist here. Like these units are just kind of underwhelming. They have like strong aesthetics, but they don't really bring anything to the table. Dryad, we've already talked about it. Moonkin, we've already talked about it. Mountaineer is used in a lot of PvE maps, and I feel like just buffing him outright would probably be a mistake, because it would make those PvE maps a lot harder. And there's already a lot of negative sentiment against Mountaineer as it stands. So what I think the safest way to buff Mountaineer is maybe to look at his talents and shore those up in a different way, just to make him a more compelling pick. Cairn is an interesting one, because what he brings to the table is he makes some units tankier, and in the future, like maybe having 20% extra health on certain units like Stonehoof or Witch Doctor, or even the Troll, Darkspirit Troll, might be really beneficial, especially if like Deep Breath is nerfed, because it might change the breakpoints specifically for Witch Doctor. Cairn is kind of struggling maybe a little bit, because he himself is not like a very compelling play. So like you're mostly just playing him to get a little bit of extra, oomph out of your horde units. Anu is interesting because he's just like not very good for combat stats. So like you're spending 6 gold to fall behind. So maybe the vulnerability needs to come off and like lower his health just a little bit. So he's not as vulnerable to, spells just completely removing him. And when I say a little bit of health, like maybe 200 health off of his 3,000 is like a reasonable amount. Grom, this is just like a personal thing. I feel like Bladestorm is like incredibly lackluster. There's no excitement to it. He just goes out. He does like, think about Herod in the campaign. Herod like spins around. He's like Bladestorm, blaze of light. Like he's going out there. He's spinning around. He's like this doom top. Where's Grom, man? Like, why does Grom suck? He was the original spin to win. You know what I'm saying? Why is he so unimpressive in comparison? It just doesn't make sense to me. It would be cool if like it broke roots and like he moved forward while it was happening. Thanos, I just think that Thanos is like kind of in a toxic design space. Like he was utterly broken in the Gold Rush modifier plus what was the other thing? The Hero's Resolve, because it was really hard to remove him. Like that's the highest I've ever been in PvP. I was at 7,000 and I basically dropped no games on my way there. And yeah, outside of that, he's terrible. Like he just doesn't scale. There's no meaningful progress you can make with him. And I think like maybe having a talent that allows him to keep some of the levels that he gains when he spawns would make him a little bit more compelling and also lean into his design. And the big issue is simply just how many levels you can ultimately get, because like 10 levels is a lot. It's like 2.5x stats, maybe 2.6, I think. So ultimately, what are all the problems? Let's just summarize them because we covered a lot here. The biggest problem here is the game has a lack of hype, and this stems from 5 different things. The first one is the new unit releases are kind of uncompelling. The majority of them are releasing in an okay or underwhelming state. And if the unit is like not immediately obvious, like how good it's going to be, there's very little reason for players to like trip over themselves to get it. The second is new content is kind of trivial on release. Skullomance is a prime example of this. It's like you just clear it because you have way too many levels. There needs to be some mechanics in place that make the content more challenging when it comes out. The third problem is there's a lack of evergreen content. Evergreen content is your primary vehicle for driving advertisement in the game. If you don't have any compelling reason for content makers to make content, think about it. Like the only stuff that can really be made is one-time clears. Like, okay, I cleared Elwyn Forest one time. All right, well, that content's done forever. I can't make it again. So the big problem is it needs more evergreen content that gets people discussing, gets the community active, and gets people engaged with the game. There are massive barriers to entry, particularly in PvP. It's just when you start off, like you just start getting stomped immediately. The game is like pretty aggressive with its monetization. While there are more resources than ever, and you can kind of climb if you're patient, which is the primary monetization model of the game. It's very hard to, actually find a reason to start playing the game because like you're so far behind already. And then finally, long drawn out PvP games. The meta just needs a look at here. I think that long games are generally unfun. I think most people would agree. And games being decided in overtime the last 10 seconds because of a few server ticks of like timing something at the exact right moment when it's very difficult to do that, it just doesn't seem very compelling as far as gameplay goes. So hopefully this has given you some inspiration. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. While I have very little hope for where the game is going based off of recent events, I think that it can be overcome, and I think that it can be fixed. It's just my solutions are not necessarily going to be the best ones. It's just I think these are the core problems with the game, and ultimately I think everyone at the end of the day just wants to be excited for the game again. Like there's been just a lot of setbacks, and it feels like those setbacks have created a level of negativity that are going to impede progress on the game. And I think people are looking for that affirmation, that positivity to come back to it, something to hope for. Where do I see myself playing this game in the future? Thank you all for watching. Catch you on the flip side. This might be my last video. We'll see. Take it easy, all. Bye-bye.